Hi everybody. Today I'm here to answer the question, what are the risks for abuse by family caregivers? Family caregivers can unintentionally abuse loved ones and vice versa. The person receiving care can be abusive to the family caregiver. So caregivers, and rightly so, are asking, what are the risks for family abuse? Can I be accused of abuse if my aging parents refuse care? What level of care is considered abusive or neglectful? Do I have to be a caregiver for my parent? There are a lot of situations where abuse can be suspected. Some are obvious, and others, arise out of good intentions that just go bad. For example, an over-controlling caregiver can have a lot of rules for daily care and activities for the person they care for. And while these rules may be well-intended to keep a loved one healthy, they can unintentionally take away the rights of the person to have a choice. And let's use meals and activities as a simple one. If a parent has diabetes, or they're not healthy, or maybe they're losing weight, the caregiver may feel that they have to tightly control the situation so that a parent's health doesn't get worse. For example, your 90-year-old parent, they want to eat cookies instead of a healthy meal. How much of a difference is this really going to make if it only happens 1 day a week or 2 days a week? Is the world going to end? What if a parent with dementia has their days and nights confused, and they get up in the middle of the night and they're in the refrigerator and they're eating stuff and they're eating pie and all this kind of stuff? So in these situations where caregivers exert a lot of control, you have to really consider what's really important versus what things can you let go, because they're not going to have a significant impact on a care situation. If your parent eats a bag of cookies 1 day a week, is the world going to end? Now, again, if they're diabetic or something else, it can cause problems. But in general, if somebody's, living their life and they want a snack, why not? Okay? So, on the other hand, caregivers who are burned out or exhausted, they can become unintentionally forgetful or distracted, forget to give medications, monitor a skin wound, not take blood sugar, miss a dose of insulin, or forget to do other care tasks that are really important because they're just emotionally stressed out, freaked out, worried, anxious, distracted, cannot focus. So stay with me while I share some other stories and examples about the risk for abuse by family caregivers and the risk for abuse by the care receiver back to the caregiver. So that if you are this well-intended family caregiver, you can make sure that you don't unintentionally get caught up in any of this and become involved with the police or adult protective services as this suspected elder abuser or neglector. Because caregiving does go both ways. If this is your first time on my channel, I'm Pamela D Wilson. I'm a caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker who helps older adults and their caregivers work through the complexities of health, financial, legal aspects, navigating family relationships, healthcare providers, really the A to Z of caregiving. You can learn more about me and my professional experience of almost 25 years in aging and caregiving by scrolling below to find my bio, links to my website, how to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me, programs on my website, my podcast, my blog. A lot of information below. Please do like this video, follow my channel, share these and other videos, and comment, even if it's only to say thank you for the video. Your participation, your comments help other people throughout the world find these videos, their way to my channel, and their way to my website, which is PamelaDWilson.com. So, the risks of abuse by family caregivers can result, like I said, from really good intentions that just go a little too far. Mostly due to worry or exhaustion or worrying about, can I control this? Can I control that? What can I do? What are my parents doing? And so this type of abuse by family caregivers happens most frequently than when there is only one primary caregiver and there's little or no involvement by other family members or friends. Now, a lot of times what happens is family members and friends, if there's a primary caregiver, they're like, whew, thank God somebody's doing the job. I don't have the time and I don't want to do it. But eventually later they can get involved and start judging this caregiver for things that they've done or haven't done. And you as that caregiver are thinking, where do they have the right to judge me? Where have they been for the past 4 years? Now all of a sudden they're interested? That happens. Let's talk about siblings. Siblings can complain about another sibling, so brother or sister, caring for an aging parent. Yet the complaining sibling, again, has had no involvement because they went on with their life. Suddenly they're looking at things and they're saying, well, gosh, Mom and Dad are spending a lot of money on, this or that or outside caregivers, and, should this be happening? Well, if you weren't involved and now you're getting involved, it's maybe a little too late. Maybe your sibling was not spending money in the best way possible. Well, where were you a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago? So this abuse can be abuse through a lack of participation and a lack of interest. Then let's talk about aging parent or care receiver abuse to the caregiver. The risk for abuse in family care situations can reverse. So an aging parent may not allow an adult child caregiver to hire paid caregivers. They're like, no, I don't want to pay for caregivers. I want you to be the caregiver. Well, then that caregiver becomes burned out. So the aging parent is unintentionally abusing the goodwill, the good nature, the health, the well-being of a son or a daughter or a spouse, because they're saying, no, I'm not going to allow that. I'm not going to pay for that. I don't want outside people coming in. I'm not going to the doctor. I'm not taking medications. So this abuse goes both ways. And the actions of aging parents can be considered self-abusive or self-neglectful when they do refuse to take care of themselves, or their house is a mess, or it's hoarding, or there's dog and cat messes everywhere. If somebody from the outside comes in, like the police or adult protective services, and they see this mess, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. And by the way, where are the kids? Why aren't the kids helping out? Where is the family? You're going to be one of the first people to get the phone call. And so we're going to talk about how to avoid getting that phone call in a minute. So parents who are self-neglectful or self-abusive, these actions can fall on the children, who again can feel powerless if your parents are saying, no, I'm not doing all this. Now, if a parent has dementia or Alzheimer's, there are other things that happen. If they have a power of attorney document and it's a child or somebody else, that person whose power of attorney should show up and start doing things, because the parent obviously isn't making good decisions. But in these situations where, parents are saying no and children are like, oh, we don't feel comfortable with that, adult children can be afraid of being accused of neglecting their parents' care, when in reality, they're really doing everything that they can to get a parent to cooperate. The parent is just saying no. And parents who have their, wits about them or in their right minds, don't have Alzheimer's or dementia, obviously have the right to say no. But then the children who are caregivers obviously have the right to say, well, if you're saying no, I'm setting a boundary. I'm not rushing in to help you when you have a disaster, because you knowingly created the disaster. So let's say that you're in the situation where your parents are refusing care and you've tried and you're just like throwing up your hands. Well, if the situation is really bad and you feel like you can't do anything, you might be the better person to make the early report to the police and to Adult Protective Services about your parent, to try to get your parent to accept help, and for you to try to work with Adult Protective Services. This is the ideal situation. Rarely happens this way because kids feel bad about reporting their parents, or they don't know that they can, or they don't know how the system works. But that would be the ideal situation. Now, if a parent has Alzheimer's or dementia, that brings in a whole different aspect. Then you may need to consult a caregiving expert like myself or somebody else to look at your options and how you might need to proceed that may or may not involve the police or Adult Protective Services. Maybe you need to get some legal assistance. Aging parents who refuse care and then expect their children to pick up the pieces when a disaster strikes can be similar to a person who is addicted to substances. And then they expect their family members to pick up the pieces when they get fired from a job or need money to pay for something or end up in the hospital emergency room and they want to be rescued, right? These are very self-abusive, neglectful, toxic family situations that can be really hard to work through, especially if you're the person who's like emotionally attached and you feel like you need to show up, but it's causing you a lot of stress and anxiety, and then you feel powerless. They're very hard to work through. Let's just talk about some simple family care situations. Let's say dedicated caregiver, son, daughter, spouse, been in this role for several years. This caregiver knows the person who needs care better than anybody else. They know what time they wake up, what time they go to bed, if they don't sleep at night, they know what their food preferences are, when they like to bathe, shower, all that kind of stuff. Being so intimately involved with another person can make that caregiver do too much for the person and make the person very dependent on the caregiver. So, somebody asks mom or dad what they want and they're like, oh, I don't know, ask your sister or brother. There's this relationship of like codependency that can happen that's not positive. So there's a lot of positives and negatives about this. The negatives happen when nobody else is involved in care situation because everybody else is like, phew, they're taking care of it. I'm not getting involved. Same thing can happen with your parents, a spouse caregiver, and there's no outside assistance. The problem is this lack of involvement by other people places a huge burden on that caregiver. And if you're on the outside, you cannot even understand what it's like to be a caregiver working 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week or a full-time caregiver. It's hard to understand that if you're not in the role. Now, some caregivers honestly don't want other people involved because they think it's more work for them and they want to control the situation. So for those caregivers who are control freaks, some of them just don't want to compromise with other people. They maybe have invited their brother and sister to help out and they don't do it their way. So they're like, well, you can't, I don't want you to help anymore. They just want to have a lot of control, and that always does not work. That works to the negative for the caregiver, who then gets burned out and exhausted and frustrated and angry. So what caregivers often don't consider is that involving other people, even though maybe a little more work initially, can be really good because as a caregiver, it can give you a break, it can give you time off, if you can be flexible to accept help from other people. And then think about the fact that maybe your parent would like to see somebody else besides you every day. And admittedly, older parents can be resistant. They don't want to pay for caregivers to come into the home. But again, as I talked before, think of that as reverse abuse by a parent. That parent wants to remain in total control. So you've got control over here and you got control over here and you got abuse and neglect in the middle. I mean, imagine what it would be like to be that caregiver and only see a parent or a spouse to a spouse, and you've got no life outside of that. You can't even go, run an errand or go do a social activity or something like that. That is a self-imposed prison because you're stuck in the four walls of this house caring for this person. Now, I will say that sometimes there are older adults who've been isolated all their lives. They haven't wanted to be around a lot of people. Maybe they were loners. And so having a caregiver and being alone with a caregiver may be like normal for them, but may not be normal for everybody. So it's important to look at the context of the person's life before they needed care and what it's like after they need care and who's involved and how all of that's working. Isolation and loneliness can become a way of life for the caregiver and the care receiver when no one else is involved. And it can become abusive when the caregiver is worn out and exhausted and the person who receives care is angry or frustrated about their help or the fact that they can't get out and they can't do things. Then you have these two people who are not in a positive relationship. They feel like they're stuck with each other day after day in the four walls of this home and they don't know how to change the situation. So unless somebody comes in from the outside or these people seek outside help, then nothing changes. So if you are a brother or sister watching this type of situation in your family where your brother or sister's caring for mom and dad or somebody else is, do whatever you can to check in even if you're not helping. Just make a call to your sibling to say, hey, are you doing okay? I realize it's a lot of work. I appreciate what you're doing. Talk to mom and dad or say, how is it going for you? Just to make sure that one person is not abusing the other. Do not ignore this situation because eventually something is going to happen. A breaking point will happen. I have known family caregivers who are adult children who one day wake up and say, you know what, I've been doing this for 5 years, I'm done, and they just leave. Now, they previously asked siblings for help, but the siblings are like, oh, you're doing it, no worries, I'm too busy, I can't do it. Then all of a sudden, the siblings who weren't helping are upset with the caregiver who left for being so thoughtless and leaving. Well, who was thoughtless? Maybe it was the siblings who weren't helping out. These non-caregiver siblings, in my opinion, have no right to be upset because they participated in the burnout and the abuse and the isolation and the potential neglect by not participating, or at least offering other solutions, saying, hire in-home care. Let me help you pay for it. Mom or dad should move to a care community. I mean, if you're not involved, it's really hard for you to come in and all of a sudden want to change things. So other scenarios are, family caregivers burned out. They decide that they're done and they want to put mom and dad into a care community. And the other siblings are saying, well, you can't do that. Well, yes, you can. Unless your siblings are willing to step up and be the caregiver or move mom and dad into their home, you have a choice to stop being that caregiver. And they can either step in or they don't step in. These are hard decisions that happen in situations. Other types of abuse: emotional, physical, financial. Financial abuse is pretty straightforward. Your sibling is using your parents' money irresponsibly. They're spending it on bad things. They're using the money to pay for their own vacations. They're stealing. They're using it for, ridiculous things. Then we've got the emotional and the physical abuse that can really go both ways. The caregiver can feel emotionally abused by demanding behaviors or care refusals of the person who needs care. The care receiver can be or feel abused if a caregiver is impatient or rude or just exhausted, right? But these behaviors are kind of going both ways because the situation's really hard. When Alzheimer's or dementia is a diagnosis, caregivers can be under a lot more strain because there are a lot of behaviors that are associated with memory loss that may not make sense. A lot of caregivers purposely feel like their parents are forgetting information or forgetting to do things. And that's usually not true because Alzheimer's or dementia makes people forgetful. Then, as I mentioned before, the caregiver and the person who needs care can be isolated. If family members are criticizing the primary caregiver, maybe the primary caregiver says, well, fine, if you're going to criticize me, you don't get to talk to mom and dad and you can't visit. I don't want you causing problems for me. I'm done. Unless you want to get involved, you don't get to see people. Well, in a perfect world, caregivers would get help, outside help. They would encourage visits by friends and family caregivers, and they'd establish care teams and do all this. But that rarely happens until the caregiver is burned out. And again, as I mentioned, family caregivers who feel criticized by other people can shut people out of their lives. Physical abuse, unintentionally. A caregiver overestimates their ability to help mom and dad get up out of a chair and mom and dad fall and break something. Physical abuse can happen from trying to lift somebody and you bruise their arms because you're inappropriately lifting them. Physical abuse can come from hitting people, getting angry. That happens. Unintentional physical abuse, ignoring a skin wound or a sore that can become huge in size and cause problems. Not trimming a parent's toenails and they're curling under the toes. There's all kinds of unintentional things that happen just because caregivers don't know better. So what are solutions to avoid all these situations? Again, if you're a family caregiver, not involved, not helping out, do regular check-ins with the caregiver and the person who needs care. Zoom calls, visits, offer to give the caregiver a break. Spend time with your mom and dad. Offer to pay for a caregiver one day a week if you have the financial resources to do that. Maybe buy groceries, pay a housekeeper, do something so that you're involved even just a little bit if you can't show up. If you're in that family caregiving situation and one sibling agrees to be the primary caregiver, support that brother and sister. Put agreements in writing. It can make the situation much easier when it gets harder for that person. If you are that caregiver, consider bringing in outside help. Don't let your parents say, no, I'm not going to pay for it. If there's money, pay for it. And start that process way before you become burned out and exhausted so that you can maintain as much of your life as possible. And while doing a lot of this may seem like more work, I got to tell you, in the end, the benefits are going to outweigh that initial effort when you have a good relationship established with a care agency, or you have a plan to move a parent to a care community, or your siblings are helping out even just a little bit. Never, ever do it on your own if you have other options, and be open to other options. Also, be careful to notice your emotions and your stress levels. While dealing with caregiving can be really easy in the beginning, the longer you are a caregiver, the more emotional wear and tear you will experience. May not be noticeable at first, but it will take a toll over time. So to potentially avoid abusive caregiver situations, pay attention to times when you feel worn out, exhausted, angry, regretful. Make plans immediately to get help. Have those conversations in your family, early, ongoing, and frequently. I thank you so much for being here. I'm Pamela D Wilson, a caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. A lot of help below, links to my website, podcast, online caregiver programs, my blog, more articles, ways to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me. Please do like this video, share my channel, comment, even if it's only to say thanks. One little thank you goes a long way into helping other people find their way here for hope, help, and support. I'll see you all again soon in another video.